Welcome back to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So you've sent over a really fascinating collection this time. We're journeying through Eastern philosophy, ancient India, Persia, China. It's quite a landscape.
It really is a huge amount of material covering religion, society, philosophy, all sorts.
And our job, as always, is to kind of guide listeners through it, pull out the key stuff, maybe find some surprising links,
Yeah.
without getting totally lost in the weeds.
Exactly. Keep it focused, find those aha moments.
Okay, so let's start where the sources do, with some of those early Western perspectives on Asia. It paints a particular picture.
It does, doesn't it? Sort of exotic, commercially interesting.
And definitely in need of civilization. That comes through quite strongly.
Mm-hmm. And Christianity, of course, it's that lens of cultural superiority. And Japan gets singled out for its, imitative talent.
Yeah, like they're good copycats, but not original thinkers. It definitely sets a tone.
It really shapes how those early encounters must have played out.
Right. But then moving beyond that surface level, the sources do acknowledge some really deep philosophical roots pretty early on, specifically the Aryans in India.
Yes, their thought is described as rudimentary, though marvelous. Quite a phrase.
It is. And it's positioned as this foundation, not just for later Indian thought, but maybe even influencing Greece.
That's a key point. The sources bring up that whole debate about Greece's debt to India and also the influence of Persia, also Aryan, of course. Think Zoroaster.
Whose ideas Plato and Aristotle apparently knew. It suggests a much more connected, ancient world than we sometimes imagine.
Absolutely, not these neat separate boxes.
And this idea of the Aryans as, almost an intellectual aristocracy,
Yeah.
it seems to filter into their social views, too.
There's that mention of them feeling, qualified and resolute to dominate opposing races.
Ruling justly, they claimed, but rule they would. Submission was the expected role for others.
And the source explicitly draws a parallel there, doesn't it, to Western expansion. America, Canada.
Yeah, it's hard to miss that justification narrative.
It highlights that recurring dynamic of power and ideology.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Let's look at the early Indian understanding of their place in the cosmos, their connection to the unseen.
There's that quote from Schleiermacher defining religion as the knowledge of our absolute dependence.
Something that determines us, but we can't determine in return. That feels very central.
It really captures that sense of interconnectedness, humility, reliance on something bigger than the individual self. Bit different from some Western perspectives, maybe.
And linked to that, there's this intriguing idea floated that Eastern thought could, quote, rescue the Western world from materialism.
Yes, the classic contrast. East as spiritual, tolerant, leisured. West as worldly, hurried, opinionated.
Big generalizations, obviously, but it poses that question. Can these different paths find a point of fusion? It's still relevant today, I think.
Definitely. Can these different ways of being, these different priorities, actually learn from each other? It's a perennial question.
Now, here's something that kind of surprised me, given the spiritual focus. The sources point to a real emphasis on, what we call objective science in ancient India.
Right. Mathematics, astronomy, analyzing matter.
There's that quote about measuring land, dividing the year, mapping the heavens.
It really challenges that simple East-West spiritual material dichotomy. They were clearly engaged in understanding the empirical world, too.
Like the Atarya Brahmana's astronomical insights. It wasn't an either situation.
Exactly. A more holistic approach to knowledge, perhaps.
Which brings us neatly to the Vedas, described as incredibly early records, not just of Aryan thought, but maybe human thought itself, predating a lot of Greek civilization.
Absolutely foundational. Rig, Yajur, Sama, Atharva, hymns, rituals, liturgies, even magic in the Atharva Veda. A complex picture of early belief.
And the Rig Veda possibly dating way, way back. Just staggering, really.
It is. And this Vedic knowledge was central to their education system, which sounds incredibly rigorous.
36 years, ideally. Living with the teacher, the guru.
Yeah, the teacher's home was the university. Huge emphasis on character building, not just absorbing facts.
Developing memory, which makes sense if texts weren't widely written down. Plus mendicancy, begging for food.
Right, instilling humility, detachment. And it wasn't just religious study. Secular subjects were integrated, too.
A truly holistic education. Now, what about marriage? The sources describe it less as equality and more as identity.
Yes, using those beautiful poetic lines from the Vishnu Purana. She is language, he is thought.
He is meaning, she is speech. It suggests Complementarity, interconnectedness.
A union of different but essential energies working together? A different model, perhaps.
Then there's the concept of ritual and impurity around disease and death.
Yeah.
The explanation given is fascinating.
It's less about physical germs, more about infectious emotional atmospheres.
Exactly. Fear, grief. These powerful emotions were seen as almost contagious, requiring a certain distance.
And the different periods of impurity for each caste reflecting their role and the community's reliance on them. It's a very different way of thinking about health and social cohesion.
And their legal system. The idea of proportional punishment really stands out.
Harsher penalties for those in authority. That's quite something.
A higher standard for the powerful, and punishment itself seen as purification.
Yes, along with confession and penance. It's about restoring balance, not just retribution. Rehabilitation, almost.
Also, the ethics around food, the preference for clean and bloodless foods.
Tied into ahimsa, nonviolence, avoiding meat for moral reasons, minimizing harm. A key principle.
And it wasn't just Easterners who saw the value. Your sources quote Victor Cousin, the French philosopher.
Right, praising the profound truths in Indian philosophy, suggesting the West could learn from the cradle of the human race.
Acknowledging that deep wisdom. Okay, one last foundational concept here. Transmigration of the soul. Reincarnation.
A widespread belief across Asia, definitely. But the sources note echoes even in the West Talients, Ovid, later poets.
Like a deep human intuition about continuity. And the Katha Upanishad sums it up. Never the spirit was born, the spirit shall cease to be never.
The eternal nature of the self. A powerful idea setting the stage for what comes next.
Okay, so from these foundations, we dive into the Upanishads. This marks a real shift, doesn't it? From the external to the inner world.
Definitely. The focus moves inward, searching for the unseen reality within. The gods are still there, but increasingly seen as manifestations.
Manifestations of the one, the ultimate reality. There's that quote about the self-existent piercing the senses outwards, but the wise person looks in.
Precisely. Introspection becomes key. The search for the Atman, the individual self, and its connection to Brahman, the ultimate.
And what about rituals? They don't seem to be rejected outright, but the perspective changes?
It's more nuanced. Rituals are seen as maybe helpful for some, a preparatory step perhaps, but not the final goal.
Something to be transcended by those seeking deeper understanding. A bit detached, almost ironic sometimes.
Yeah, there's that humorous anecdote you mentioned. The white dog barking, "Ew, let us eat."
This suggests a less reverent attitude towards the formalities, maybe, a more direct connection.
Possibly, certainly challenges the solemnity a bit.
But the core teachings are incredibly profound. The story of Nachiketas and Yama, death, that's central.
It is. Nachiketa's rejecting all worldly pleasures, long life, wealth, power, just to know the truth about the soul after death.
It's an amazing choice. And Yama's teaching, the soul is unborn, eternal, smaller than small, greater than great.
In that great analogy, the body is the chariot. The senses are the horses, the mind, the reins, and the intellect is the charioteer.
Guiding the self, the master of the chariot, such a clear image of our inner structure.
And it leads to the absolute core teaching.
Hmm.
The identity of that individual self, the Atman, with the ultimate reality, Brahman.
That art thou, Tattvamasi. So simple yet so profound, and Brahman is neuter, right? Beyond gender.
Exactly. Transcending all categories. This non-duality is the heart of Vedanta.
But the Upanishads also say this ultimate truth is beyond reason, beyond intellect.
Yes, because reason deals with the finite, the changing world of phenomena. Brahman is beyond that.
Which might seem counterintuitive from a modern scientific view, but even Western scholars like Dosen were deeply impressed.
He admired that concept of the identity of the divine and the soul, seeing its profound philosophical depth. It points to a different kind of knowing, experiential, intuitive.
Okay, now let's bring in Shankara, a hugely important figure in consolidating this Vedantic philosophy.
Absolutely. A brilliant philosopher and, according to tradition, a spiritual master. He lived relatively recently, maybe 8th or 9th century CE.
Known for his mastery of the Vedas from a young age and his unwavering emphasis on unity. Knowledge is Brahman. The soul is Brahman. Thou art that. I am Brahman.
That's the core message of Advaita Vedanta, non-dualism, which he championed. The sources mention anecdotes, too, like him calming a storm.
Yes, and his journey to Benares. He sounds like an extraordinary figure.
And the story about his mother's death is quite moving.
It shows his devotion, but also apparently his yogic powers, being there for her final moments against the odds.
It highlights that integration of deep spiritual attainment with fundamental human connections. He's seen as a kind of living embodiment of Upanishadic wisdom.
Like he brought that ancient wisdom to life. And his analogy of the rope and the serpent.
Ah, the classic explanation of Maya, illusion.
We mistake the rope, reality, the self, for a serpent, the illusion of a separate individual self in the dim light of ignorance.
Exactly. And just as light reveals the rope, true knowledge reveals the self and dispels the illusion, the fear. It's such a useful way to think about it.
It really is. Okay, so that brings us naturally to yoga, the practical path to achieving this kind of realization.
Right. The sources focus mainly on Raja Yoga, as laid out by Patanjali, distinct from, say, Hatha Yoga, which is more physical, or Mantra Yoga.
And Raja Yoga is rooted in Vedanta, connected to Sankhya philosophy.
Right.
And even the Buddha practiced yoga.
Yes, under Alara, before his enlightenment. It shows yoga was a well-established path for seeking inner truth even then.
Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, they use that image of the mind stuff, the chitta being like a lake.
And the true self, the Purusha, is at the bottom. But the lake is usually disturbed, rippled by thoughts and emotions.
So we can't see the self clearly. The goal is to calm the waters, achieve stillness.
Which leads to Patanjali's third aphorism. At the time of concentration, the seer rests in his own unmodified state, pure awareness.
He also breaks down the different kinds of mental activity, the mind stuff.
Right knowledge, misapprehension or indiscrimination, verbal delusion, sleep, memory, understanding what disturbs the lake.
And the ways to gain right knowledge. Direct perception, inference, and crucially, the testimony of reliable sources, including the yogin's direct perception.
And that yogin's perception is interesting, described as potentially transcending ordinary time, accessing a deeper reality.
The Buddha himself, called the greatest of yogins, gave very clear instructions for achieving that focused state, didn't he?
Yes, the path includes virtuous living, mastering the senses, finding solitude, and entering deep states of meditation, the jhanas or ecstasies.
A very disciplined approach. There's even that story of the Buddha calming a storm.
Which Max Miller comments on, acknowledging the simple faith of the account, but also the mystery of mind over matter. What are the limits of consciousness?
A question we still grapple with. And the sources briefly mention other paths too, bhakti yoga, devotion.
And jnana yoga, the path of insight and wisdom, reminding us Raja Yoga isn't the only way.
But the overall point seems to be that while skepticism exists, attributions to self-hypnosis or fraud, yoga is a core part of Indian philosophy about transcending normal human limits through faith and concentration.
Exactly. It's a disciplined practice aimed at achieving direct experience of a deeper reality.
Okay, let's turn to another hugely influential text, the Bhagavad Gita, set within the epic Mahabharata.
Right. The setup is incredibly dramatic. Arjuna, the great warrior, on the brink of battle against his own kin, facing a massive moral crisis.
He basically throws down his weapons, saying he can't fight his family, and Krishna, his charioteer and divine guide, starts to counsel him.
Krishna's first response is about duty, dharma. Arjuna is a warrior. His duty is to fight in this righteous war.
And crucially, to act without attachment to the results. Pleasure or pain, gain or loss. Don't let them sway you from your duty.
That's karma yoga, the yoga of action. Do your duty selflessly. Dedicate the action itself to the divine.
Krishna explains the world rests on two foundations, wisdom and good deeds done without attachment.
And he describes himself, the divine, as constantly working in the world, yet remaining utterly unchanging, unmoving.
Presenting the personal God, Krishna, as maybe a distorted image, the source says, of the ultimate impersonal absolute. That's a complex theological point.
It is. It tries to bridge the gap between the transcendent absolute Brahman and the immanent, relatable personal God that people can form a relationship with.
And the Gita's message is very inclusive too. Even they that are born of sin turning to me enter the high path.
Absolutely. Access to the divine isn't restricted by birth or past deeds. Devotion and turning towards God are key.
Arjuna eventually grasps Krishna's true nature, calling him supreme glory, and asks for the Vishvarupa, the universal form.
The vision of the supreme consciousness, a truly overwhelming cosmic revelation described in the text.
But the sources also point out there's no easy logical jump from the absolute to this personal God manifestation. It's about Arjuna's evolving understanding beyond pure logic.
It highlights the limits of reason when dealing with the transcendent. It's an experiential shift for Arjuna.
The Gita is really hailed as this incredible synthesis, isn't it? Religion and philosophy woven together.
Yes, and a powerful expression of all four main yogas: karma, bhakti, jnana, raja, and it explains Maya clearly.
Right, as partial consciousness, not total illusion, but seeing incompletely, which distorts our view of reality.
A very subtle and important concept.
Okay, quick detour. The sources briefly bring in Nietzsche.
Ah, yes. Contrasting these Eastern ideals with his ideas about slave morality and his disdain for weakness.
He's positioned as Europe's answer to the Vedanta, but with regret that he didn't engage more deeply with Eastern thought.
Yeah, it suggests his critique might have been different if he'd had a fuller understanding, perhaps missing the nuances of concepts like non-attachment or compassion.
Interesting thought. All right, let's move on to the Buddha and Buddhism, described as both a profound philosophy and a great faith.
And seen as having affinities with modern science, interestingly. Though it declined in India itself, partly due to Brahminical opposition and monastic focus.
It originated from Vedanta, the sources say, but developed in its own unique direction. We start with Siddhartha Gautama's life story.
The sheltered prince who finally encounters the harsh realities, sickness, old age, death, the foresights.
Which shakes him to the core and launches his quest to understand suffering, dukkha, and find a way beyond it.
Leading to his renunciation, years of extreme asceticism, which he eventually rejects as fruitless.
Finding the middle way, and then his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree.
Where he finally understands the cause of suffering, craving, attachment, ignorance, and realizes the path to liberation, nirvana. He sees the builder of the Bodhi prison.
And attains deliverance. There's that powerful story, too, about the proud Brahmin.
And the Buddha redefining what a true Brahmin is. Not by birth, but by putting away evil, by purity in thought, word, and deed.
Radically challenging the caste system. He also ordained women, which was revolutionary.
Yes, the story of the princess attaining enlightenment shows the path was open to all, and his absolute prohibition on killing, on bloody sacrifices.
Stemming from deep compassion, karuna and his own recollection of past lives, understanding the cycle of rebirth, the parable of the quail and the fire illustrates this.
And importantly, he didn't see himself as indispensable. The teachings, the Dharma, could stand on their own.
He wasn't teaching resignation to sorrow, but the uprooting of sorrow. And the root cause is ignorance of ija.
A crucial distinction. It's an active path, not passive acceptance.
When he died, the reactions differed Ananda's very human grief versus the enlightened Arad's calm acceptance of impermanence.
A perfect illustration of the teaching itself. His relics were distributed, honored, and the teachings compiled into the Pali Canon, the Tipitaka.
3 baskets: rules for monks, the discourses, suttas, where we find the Buddha's dialogues, and higher philosophy, Abhidhamma.
The dialogues are considered particularly important for understanding his core message. The sources mention the questions of King Milinda too, though with some reservations about its strict alignment with early doctrine.
Context is key here too, right? The Buddha emerged in a time of intense superstition and ritualism.
Very much so. The sources compare it to the European Middle Ages. Priestcraft held enormous power.
And the Buddha directly challenged that, offering experience and self-reliance. Be a lamp unto yourself instead of blind faith in rituals or priests.
It was incredibly radical. He wasn't a pessimist. Despite focusing on suffering, he was like a doctor, diagnosing an illness and offering a cure.
And the cure involved duty, altruism, self-control, leading to insight that went beyond rationalism. He wasn't a simple rationalist or materialist.
No, he used reason but ultimately pointed beyond it, based on his own profound experience of ignorance, joy, renunciation, and awakening. That gave him the authority to teach.
The sources even align him with the true scientific spirit, emphasis on experience, verification, like Newton or Einstein in his methodical approach.
Examining the mind and reality through direct observation and analysis.
The core of his philosophy. The world isn't static, it's constant change, becoming, Annika. Rejecting fixed views like it is or it is not.
The middle way again. We perceive stability because our senses are limited, and time chops things up for us. But underlying it is flux.
And socially, rejecting birth as destiny, not by birth is one of Brahman, by deeds.
Hugely significant. Actions determine your path, not lineage.
Then there's karma, explained not as divine judgment, but as a natural law, like conservation of moral energy.
Mechanical in a sense, but generated by conscious beings with free will. Every action creates ripples, consequences. Interconnectedness.
Which raises the question, if there's no permanent soul, anatta, what gets reborn? What transmigrates?
It's not a fixed thing. It's the continuity of karmic energy, the character stream, the unresolved tendencies that condition a new arising. The impact continues.
That's subtle. And the story of Sariputta's conversion really captures the essence.
Just seeing Asaji's calm dignity was enough. And Asaji's summary. of things that proceed from a cause, the Tathagata has told the cause, and also their cessation. This is the doctrine of the great recluse.
Dependent origination and the path to its cessation. The core teaching in a nutshell. Profound.
Indeed.
Okay, let's briefly touch on Tibetan Buddhism and the afterlife, specifically the Bardo Thodol.
The Tibetan Book of the Dead. It describes the experiences in the Bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth.
Initially encountering lights, deities, but these are understood as what?
Projections of one's own mind. Thought forms based on one's own karma and mental habits, not external realities.
The key is to recognize the clear, fundamental blue light, the abysmal light, as one's own true nature, the light of wisdom.
Exactly. Faith and prayer help, but recognition is crucial for liberation. The deceased gains temporary powers too.
Passing through walls, instant travel, but these are illusions to be wary of.
Yes, attachment to these powers is a distraction, preventing recognition of the clear light.
And the experience differs depending on your spiritual practice during life. A yogin has an advantage.
Significantly. Someone trained in meditation, familiar with the nature of mind, is much more likely to recognize the clear light and achieve liberation right there in the Bardo.
While the ordinary person might be more easily swept away by the visions and karmic winds.
It underscores the importance of practice in life. The final observation is quite stark. Death, like life, is a lonely journey needing clear perception.
A sobering thought. Right, let's shift focus again to Persia and the Sufis.
The mystical tradition within Islam, their core idea.
That the human soul isn't fundamentally different from the divine, just a lesser degree. An atom wanting to rejoin the whole.
Emphasis on God's immanence, God being within everything, and love being the key connection to that divine perfection.
The material world is seen as illusion, a veil. The focus is inward, on the bridegroom of the soul.
Which leads to their famous use of, well, often quite passionate, even erotic, symbolism in their poetry.
To express that intense love and longing for union with the divine, which can be misunderstood if you take it literally.
Definitely. There's a whole Sufi code for interpretation. Sleep means deep meditation. Perfume is divine presence. Kisses signify mystic union. That sort of thing.
We hear about Halaj, a famous, maybe radical Sufi.
His Anil Haq, I am the truth, expressing ecstatic union, which got him into trouble with orthodoxy.
He supposedly laughed at the cross, embracing martyrdom. His prayers emphasize God's total presence. Intense stuff.
Very intense. Sufism itself has connections drawn to earlier Persian traditions, like Mithra worship, maybe even the Indian Veda.
And the teacher-pupil devotion echoes India too. It suggests cross-cultural mystical currents.
And Sufism is credited with bringing a needed spiritual, devotional element to Islam that might have been lacking in more orthodox forms.
The sources contrast this deep permeation of Eastern philosophies in their homelands with Christianity's spread as more of an imported faith. An interesting distinction in cultural integration.
It suggests a different kind of rootedness, perhaps.
Okay, let's journey to China now. Confucius, a towering figure.
Absolutely. Confucius focused on ethics, social harmony, the noble path.
Born into a noble lineage, apparently some miraculous signs around his birth too. His mother prayed at Mount Nikyu. A Kilin appeared.
Legends often surround great figures. His mother definitely played a key role in his upbringing and education.
His early career in Luti, reflections on duty, and profound respect for tradition, like his meticulous mourning for his parents.
Filial piety is absolutely central to his thought. There's a brief mention of him separating from his wife, but not much detail. His focus seems elsewhere.
He had a deep love for music, believing it essential for good government and character, like the Greeks almost.
Yes, he saw music's power to cultivate harmony, both inner and outer. The story of him visiting the musician Xiang shows his passion for ancient, meaningful music.
He was also merciful. His rules for hunting showed compassion. And then, the big meeting. Confucius and Lao Tzu.
A fascinating encounter.
Yeah.
Respectful, but highlighting their different paths. Confucius focused on ordering this life.
Lao Tzu focused on the transcendental Tao, the way. Lao Tzu found Confucius a bit too worldly, perhaps.
Seems so, but Confucius remained courteous and reverent towards the older sage.
Confucius visited the imperial court, admired wise rulers like the Duke of Chao, and people who knew him praised him highly.
His intelligence, his presence, his virtuous influence. He clearly made a powerful impression.
His relationship with his disciples was deep. The grief over Yan Hui's death.
Yan Hui was his most beloved and virtuous disciple. His death was a huge blow. Confucius felt he'd lost someone irreplaceable.
And he knew how to guide different personalities, like the impatient Tris Lu, tailoring his teaching.
A mark of a great teacher. He counseled a despairing disciple on filial piety, the value of life.
And even with his own son, Li, he stressed the importance of studying the classic texts, the Odes, the Book of Rites for self-cultivation.
It all ties back to forming character through tradition, ethics, and learning.
His concern wasn't just abstract, it was practical. Rules for food distribution, mourning, social order, aimed at the well-being of everyone.
Summarized by those two Greek commandments, revere the divine and love your fellow men. He lived the ideal of the noble man, the Genzi.
But his later life wasn't easy. He returned to Lu after long travels.
Longing to return but finding disapproval. Some wanted him in power, others thought he should be a hermit, caught in the middle.
Like the madman of Tea singing that scornful song at him.
And the Duke of A, initially interested, then scared off by political rivals, warning against Confucius's influence.
Then the appearance of the Killins, the mythical beast, and its death. Confucius saw it as an omen.
Yeah, a sign that his teaching mission was ending, that the times were out of joint.
He finished his historical work, Spring and Autumn, seeing its value in rectifying terms, setting clear moral standards.
Then his death came. His dream, his final words, and the contrast between his son's simple burial and Yan Hui's elaborate one.
Explained by propriety, by their different stations and merits. Even in grief, he followed ritual principles.
His legacy wasn't that everyone could be him, but that he set the standard for the highest type of human being, admired for centuries.
As Herbert Giles summarized, personal excellence, social virtue, political wisdom.
A profound and lasting impact.
Now, looking at the social organization he envisioned, the existing religions lacked spiritual warmth for the masses.
That's the assessment. Confucius aimed for a government worthy of the people, showing democratic sympathies.
And adapting rules to people's understanding, like the Carpenter's Square parable, you need the standard, but apply it wisely.
His four main obligations: serve father, serve prince, cultivate sincerity, cherish all men. Filial piety and sincerity are paramount.
And unlike the idea of original sin, Confucius believed in innate nobility, potential for goodness in everyone.
A more optimistic view of human nature. Leaders must lead by example. Altruism is key, and aesthetics matter.
Music, poetry, essential for forming a great people. There are those 7 steps to virtue, too.
Starting with investigating things, extending knowledge, sincerity, rectifying the heart, cultivating the person, regulating the family, leading finally to governing the state.
It's a ripple effect. Goodness starts in the family and spreads outward.
Exactly. And this is all under the watch of heaven, the divine sovereign, with subsidiary spirits of earth and ancestors.
Reverence for the past was huge. The sage kings Yao and Shun are held up as the ultimate models.
Their virtuous rule, described in the Book of Historical Documents, contrasts sharply with later tyrants.
Like the last ruler of the He dynasty, then you have the Duke of Chao, King Wen, and Wu Wang.
Ideal rulers from a later period whose laws Confucius revered. He dreamt of the Duke of Chao.
That shows his deep respect. The Book of Historical Documents itself was vital, nearly lost in the book burnings, but recovered.
Preserving that ancient wisdom was crucial for Confucius. His teachings offered hope for a virtuous society led by virtuous, divinely attuned rulers.
Okay, shifting now to the other giant of Chinese thought, Lao Tzu, representing that more mystical, Indian-like realization of union.
Yes, akin to nirvana or Christian peace. An enigmatic figure associated with solitude, nature. Some even doubt he existed historically. The legend has him writing the Tao Te King, the classic of the way and virtue, just before disappearing beyond the Western Pass.
A contrast to Confucius, who stayed in the world. Lao Tzu sought withdrawal.
And the Tao Te King reflects that condensed, suggestive, poetic. Even Jesuits try to find Christian echoes in it.
Tao itself, the way, is explained as reason or the word in a profound spiritual sense.
And the teachings derive from it. The highest excellence is like water. Humility finding the lowest place.
Unity of mind and spirit through concentration, like yoga. Governing gently, like cooking a small fish. Don't overdo it.
Fewer laws mean better people. Gentleness overcomes hardness. The way itself is beyond the senses.
Powerful counterintuitive wisdom. There's that story of Emperor Ming-Ti stopping executions after reading Lao Tzu.
Suggests a real-world impact. And the anecdote of Trent Sanghu's friends singing by his corpse.
A totally different view of death and propriety than Confucius's disciple Tse Kung could grasp. Naturalness versus ritual.
Exactly. Which leads us to Chuang Tzu, Lao Tzu's great disciple.
who made the teachings maybe more accessible, more practical, and emphasize reconciling opposites.
Like Heraclitus, there is nothing which is not objective. There is nothing which is not subjective. Everything contains its opposite.
Illustrated by that great fable of the monkeys and the nuts, adjusting the delivery but keeping the total the same satisfies their perception.
It shows the relativity of our views and the underlying unity. Chuang Tzu also reflects on life as a dream, the limits of our knowing, suggesting reliance on another, perhaps the Tao itself.
There's that dialogue where Confucius praises equilibrium, nothing so level as a pool of still water.
Contrasted with Chuang Tzu's being and not acting, in a way, aligning with the universal rhythm, effortlessness, almost like take no thought for the morrow.
He uses humor and paradox, too, the encounter between Confucius and the robber chief Chi.
Hilariously challenges conventional ideas of virtue, and the story of the river spirit humbled by the vastness of the ocean.
A lesson in perspective, avoiding narrowness, and then Confucius meeting the old fisherman.
Who embodies the Tao, the law, through his simple, natural life. Confucius reveres him.
And the fisherman describes the bliss of God as utterly beyond human concepts, the limits of language again.
It's a powerful image of realized wisdom. It's ironic, though, isn't it? Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu's teachings remained more for the few.
While Confucianism became the state ideology, absorbed into the mainstream, different paths, different fates.
Taoism later degenerated somewhat into superstition and magic, sadly, though it still enriched Chinese literature and myth.
But China, the sources suggest, needed that middle way, incorporating both spirit and matter, which led them to embrace
Buddhism. It offered a path that resonated, providing both philosophical depth and accessible forms of devotion.
The popular form of Buddhism took root, emphasizing a reachable God, influencing art profoundly, those 6 canons, rhythmic vitality.
But the text warns against just seeking the Buddha superficially. You need to grasp the cause of his teaching.
Which is realizing the unreality of the phenomenal world by contemplating the absolute, the deeper philosophical core.
Exactly.
Briefly mentioning Japan, again, Shinto focused on patriotism, loyalty, appeasing deities, not much on death initially.
A different emphasis, more rooted in the land and the present life, until Buddhism arrived.
Okay, back to China for Mencius, second only to Confucius, really, and his mother is legendary.
Yes. Revered as a model of wise parenting, moving house away from the graveyard, then the market, settling near a school.
And cutting the thread on her loom to show him the futility of abandoning his studies. Powerful lessons.
Mencius carried forward Confucian ideals, emphasizing benevolent governance in his talks with princes.
Very practical advice. Plant mulberry trees for silk, breed animals properly, educate the people, improve their lives fundamentally.
And his idea that a ruler sharing joy with the people is the path to true royal power. Connect with them.
So, wrapping up this vast survey, the need for balance between spirit and matter seems a constant theme.
China sought it, found a version of it in Buddhism's integration. And understanding someone like the Buddha requires more than just surface-level acceptance.
It requires grappling with those profound concepts like impermanence and the nature of the self.
Definitely. And looking forward, the sources see potential convergence, Western thought, perhaps circling back towards Vedantic ideas.
The enduring quest for a stable, divine basis for life. Spinoza, Blake, even Nietzsche's visions of a higher path, India found its own way.
It leaves us contemplating the ongoing dialogue between these ancient wisdom traditions and our modern world.
Well, thank you for navigating that incredible expanse with us, from India's ancient wisdom through yoga, the Gita, the Buddha, Taoism, Confucius. It's been quite the journey.
It truly has. So many profound ideas, intricate philosophies, and compelling figures. Lots to think about.
We hope listeners found those connections, those insights we talked about, and can see how these ancient thoughts might still speak to our world today. Materialism, spirituality, social order.
They raise fundamental questions that don't really go away.
So the final thought to leave with everyone, from all this richness, all this complexity, what single thread of understanding feels most relevant, most useful for navigating our world right now?
That's a great question for reflection. And of course, for anyone wanting more, the sources you shared offer endless avenues for deeper exploration.